Well, hello. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're diving into a story that sounds like a fever dream, but is all too real. Picture yourself on a sweltering, sun-baked tropical island, maybe somewhere in the Caribbean, say 200 years ago. The air is thick, syrupy with humidity, and you can feel the sweat just constantly, a second skin you didn't ask for. You'd give almost anything for a genuine chill, a truly cold drink, something to cut through that oppressive heat. Now imagine a rather dapper fellow from up north, probably looking a bit out of place in his woolens, turning to you and saying, "I can sell you winter. Not a cool breeze, not a shady spot, but actual, solid, glistening ice." Sounds a bit unhinged, doesn't it? Honestly, back then, without the hum of an air conditioner or even a reliably cold soda, you probably wouldn't have survived a single summer in some of these places without developing a very, very strong and personal relationship with a palm leaf fan and a stoic acceptance of your own dampness. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel find other curious minds like yours. And hey, feel free to share your location and local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from, what corner of the world is settling down for a story. Now dim your lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's embark on tonight's journey together. You are Frederick Tudor, and it's the dawn of the 19th century in Boston, Massachusetts. You're a young man, barely out of your teens, born into a family of some considerable wealth and Boston Brahmin status. Your brothers have pursued respectable careers in law and the like. But you feel a different kind of ambition stirring, a restlessness that the powdered wigs and mahogany desks of conventional success can't quite satisfy. You stroll through the bustling Boston streets, the clip-clop of horses on cobblestone a familiar rhythm, the scent of salt air mixing with coal smoke. But your mind isn't on the price of tea or the latest shipment from England. No, you're thinking about ice. Specifically, you're fixated on the thick, clear ice harvested from New England's frozen ponds and lakes each winter. This isn't a new invention, of course. Wealthy folks have had ice houses for years, small, insulated structures where they'd pack away winter's bounty to enjoy chilled drinks and preserved foods through the warmer months. It's a local luxury, a seasonal treat. But your idea? It's on a completely different scale. You imagine taking this New England ice, tons of it, and shipping it, not just down the coast, but south, way south, to the sweltering, sticky, perpetually summer-struck islands of the Caribbean, to places where ice is as fantastical as a talking dog. You share your vision. Imagine the scene, perhaps at a family dinner, the candelabra casting flickering shadows on concerned faces. "I intend," you announce with a youthful, unwavering confidence, "to transport frozen water from our Massachusetts ponds to Martinique." The silence that follows is probably thick enough to skate on. Your family, bless their conventional hearts, likely thinks your only marketable skill up to this point has been building a rather impressive snowman. They, along with most of Boston society, deem your plan utterly, magnificently absurd. The newspapers get wind of it, and they have a field day. They dub you the Ice King, and it's not meant as a compliment. It's a sneer, a public jest. Who would buy frozen water? They chuckle. How could it possibly survive the journey? It's a fair question. You're proposing to sail tons of frozen water across hundreds of miles of warm ocean in wooden ships with no refrigeration technology to speak of beyond, well, more ice and sawdust. The first person you earnestly explained your detailed business plan to probably discreetly checked your forehead for a fever, or perhaps inquired if you'd accidentally sampled too much of your father's unchilled Madeira. The very notion seems to defy common sense, physics, and perhaps a touch of sanity. Yet you are undeterred. You possess a peculiar blend of vision, stubbornness, and perhaps a healthy dose of not really caring what anyone else thinks. The thing is, while many laughed, ice harvesting itself was a genuine, if localized, industry. Come winter, men would indeed venture onto frozen bodies of water, scoring the ice, then cutting it into large, manageable blocks, using horse-drawn ice plows and specialized saws. These weren't delicate little ice cubes. These were hefty, glistening slabs, destined for those aforementioned private ice houses. Your innovation isn't the harvesting, but the audacious scale of its distribution. One rather curious detail from your early efforts to drum up interest involves you, so the story goes, staging a public demonstration in Boston during a particularly warm spell. You prepared a large quantity of punch, chilled to perfection with your New England ice, right there in the open for all to see and taste. People were amazed. They queued up. They marveled at the refreshing coolness in the summer heat. And yet, even as they sipped, many still shook their heads at the idea of this same ice ever reaching the tropics intact. It was one thing to keep it cold in Boston, quite another to send it on a tropical vacation. Historians still debate the precise spark of your initial motivation. Was it purely the lure of profit, a young capitalist sensing an untapped, if unconventional market? Or was there an element of genuine problem solving, a desire to bring comfort and better food preservation to warmer climates? Perhaps it was even a touch of youthful rebellion, a desire to do something so outlandish that it would force the staid Boston society to finally take notice of Frederick Tudor, the young man who dared to dream of selling winter. Whatever the mix, you're about to embark on a business venture that most people rank somewhere between successfully selling refrigerators to penguins and teaching cats to appreciate interpretive dance. The chips are down, the laughter is loud, but your gaze is fixed on the horizon and on a future where the Ice King is a title of respect, not ridicule. Your conviction is a fragile flame in a storm of doubt, but it burns stubbornly. The year is 1806. You, Frederick Tudor, are 23 years old, and you're ready to make your absurd dream a reality. You charter a brig, a sturdy little two-masted sailing ship, named, with a touch of perhaps unintentional irony, the Favorite. Now, convincing a ship owner to lease you their vessel for such a harebrained scheme is one thing. Finding a captain and crew willing to sail south with a cargo designed to self-destruct in warm weather is another entirely. Finding a crew willing to sail south with a cargo of frozen water in 1806 is probably harder than finding a vegetarian at a Texas barbecue. Most sailors are a superstitious lot to begin with, and a ship laden with melting ice, deep in the warm Caribbean currents, sounds like tempting a very specific, chilly kind of maritime misfortune. But you manage it, perhaps with a combination of financial incentive and the sheer force of your unwavering, slightly unnerving enthusiasm. The loading process itself is a frantic race against the sun. The large blocks of ice, harvested from Fresh Pond in Cambridge, are carted to the wharf in Charlestown. Each handling, each moment exposed to the milder Boston air, causes the precious cargo to weep, to lose a bit of its frozen integrity. You oversee the packing, experimenting with insulation. Your first idea? Sawdust. Lots and lots of sawdust, stuffed between the ice blocks and the wooden hull of the favorite. It's a rustic solution, born of necessity and available materials. You're essentially trying to build a giant, floating thermos out of a wooden ship. Finally, with about 130 tons of ice nestled in its bed of sawdust, the favorite sets sail for the French island of Martinique. Imagine yourself on deck, the familiar New England coastline receding, replaced by the vast expanse of the Atlantic. The creak of the timbers, the snap of the sails, and a constant nagging worry about what's happening down in the hold. Is your winter horde turning into a premature spring flood? You can almost hear the sarcastic chuckles back in Boston, envisioning your return, head bowed, pockets empty, after a journey of about 3 weeks, a journey where every warmer breeze feels like a personal affront from Mother Nature. The favorite arrives in Saint-Pierre, Martinique. You peer into the hold, your heart likely doing a complicated rhythm in your chest. Miraculously, a good portion of the ice has survived. Your sawdust insulation, while not perfect, has done a respectable job. But now comes the next hurdle, selling it. The locals gather, curious and bewildered. They've seen snow on distant mountain peaks, perhaps, but this, huge, glistening blocks of solid cold, appearing as if by magic in their tropical port. They touch it, watch the water trickle from its surface in the humid air, their dark eyes wide. It's a marvel, a curiosity. But is it a product? You hadn't quite thought through the infrastructure, or lack thereof. There are no ice houses waiting in Martinique to receive your precious, rapidly diminishing cargo. You have to sell it fast, straight from the ship or hastily arranged onshore storage, which might just be a shaded shed. Your first attempts at tropical ice storage might have resembled a very expensive, very short-lived water feature, telling the locals, "Trust me, this frozen water is going to change your life, while it drips into a puddle at your feet, requires a special kind of salesmanship, or perhaps a touch of endearing delusion." That first venture is, to put it mildly, a financial disaster. Most of the ice melts before it can be sold. You lose a significant amount of money, around $4,000, which in 1806 is a small fortune. The scoffers back in Boston are, no doubt, having a grand time. "We told him so," they'd say, between sips of their comfortably room-temperature beverages. But you, Frederick, are not so easily defeated. You see this not as a complete failure, but as an expensive lesson. You've proven ice can be transported. Now you just need to figure out how to do it better, store it longer, and convince people they actually need it. You return to Boston, not entirely vanquished, but certainly humbled and significantly poorer. Your brothers probably stage an intervention, begging you to take up a sensible profession, like counting beans or suing people, but you're already sketching designs for better insulated ice depots, experimenting with different packing materials, straw, wood shavings, even blankets. You become a student of melt, a connoisseur of cold. It's during this period of intense trial and error that you begin to refine the science of ice shipping. One peculiar aspect of your burgeoning obsession is your insistence on the appearance of the ice. It wasn't enough for the ice to be cold. You wanted it to be crystal clear, pure looking like giant diamonds. Cloudy or fractured ice, you believed, looked less appealing, less pure, and would be harder to sell to a skeptical public. So you even tinker with harvesting methods, developing new tools and techniques to cut cleaner, more aesthetically pleasing blocks from the ponds. You're not just selling cold, you're selling an image of pristine northern purity. The path forward is far from smooth. Just as you're starting to make some headway, figuring out bits of the complex puzzle, a major historical event throws a colossal iceberg in your path. The War of 1812 between the United States and Great Britain. International trade grinds to a halt. Shipping lanes become battlegrounds. Your fledgling ice business, entirely dependent on maritime transport, is effectively put on ice itself in the least helpful way possible. These are lean years. You face debtors, even a stint in debtor's prison. It's a brutal setback that would lead most to abandon such a precarious enterprise. Historians still engage in lively debate regarding the primary reasons for your early significant struggles. Was it mainly the technological hurdles, the difficulty of preserving ice on long sea voyages, and storing it in tropical climates without modern refrigeration? Or did your initial misjudgment of market demand and consumer habits in the tropics play a more significant role? Were you trying to sell a product people didn't yet know they wanted? Or were you simply unable to deliver it reliably and affordably enough at first? It was likely a frustrating combination of both, a perfect storm of logistical nightmares and marketing challenges. Yet through all of this, your singular icy vision, somehow, someway, refuses to thaw. You are waiting, biding your time, learning, and preparing for the moment the world is ready for your impossible commodity. The War of 1812 finally drags to a close in 1815, and like a stubborn New England perennial after a long winter, you, Frederick Tudor, reemerge, your icy dreams somehow still intact, perhaps even sharpened by the enforced hiatus. Those years of frustration, of seeing your ambitions thwarted by cannons and blockades, haven't extinguished your fire. They've merely banked the coals, ready to flare up again. You've had time to think, to plan, to refine your strategies. You realize now that just landing a shipload of rapidly melting ice on a tropical dock isn't a business model. It's a gamble, and usually a losing one. What you need is control. Control over storage, control over distribution, and crucially, a way to cultivate a desire for your product where little to none existed before. So you shift your focus. It's no longer just about shipping ice. It's about building an entire infrastructure to support it. This means constructing specially designed ice houses in key southern ports. Imagine the sheer audacity. You're not just investing in the ice itself, but in expensive insulated buildings in places like Charleston, Savannah, and eventually New Orleans, and even further afield in the Caribbean. Your first major and ultimately successful foray into this integrated system is in Havana, Cuba. There, through persistence and shrewd negotiation, you managed to secure a monopoly on ice sales for a number of years. This is a game changer. Your new motto is basically, if you build it, an ice house, they will chill. These ice houses are marvels of their time, often built with double walls, packed with insulation like sawdust or rice husks, and designed to minimize melt. You oversee their construction with your usual meticulous attention to detail. You're essentially creating the very first links in what we'd now recognize as a rudimentary cold chain. You experiment with different designs for the ice houses, different materials, always trying to eke out a few more days, a few more precious degrees of cold. You even start thinking about how the ships themselves could be better insulated, evolving from simply stuffing sawdust around the cargo to considering more permanent alterations to the vessels. But building storage is only half the battle. You also need to create demand. You become a tireless evangelist for the virtues of cold. You approach tavern owners and bartenders, demonstrating how ice can transform their beverages from tepid tipples into refreshing, sophisticated cocktails. You give away ice initially, encouraging them to experiment. Suddenly, juleps and cobblers, served frosty and beaded with condensation, become the height of fashion. You also target doctors and hospitals, convincing a skeptical southern doctor, accustomed to diseases, palavras, and miasmas, that a rapidly melting rock of cold water is a medical marvel for reducing fevers, and preserving medicines probably involved a lot of fast talking and hoping the patient didn't get any wetter. Yet, the utility of ice in a medical context, particularly in an era before widespread understanding of germ theory, starts to gain traction. Ice could soothe, it could preserve, it could offer comfort in the stifling heat that so often accompanied illness. It's during this period that your rather peculiar personality truly shapes the business. You are, by all accounts, a bit of an eccentric, intensely focused, and not always the easiest person to deal with. One weirdly charming detail is your meticulous, almost obsessive habit of journaling. You fill volumes not just with business transactions and experiments in insulation, but with your daily observations, your health concerns, your candid and often hilariously acerbic opinions on the people you meet. These journals, thankfully preserved, offer historians an incredibly rich, personal window into your mind and your times. It's like reading the private blog of a 19th century entrepreneurial curmudgeon. Naturally, as your methods improve and the first glimmers of success appear on the horizon, academic heads, centuries later, will nod thoughtfully and debate the true engine of your progress. Historians still discuss how much of your eventual triumph was purely down to your singular vision and relentless innovation versus the broader currents of the era. Was it your genius alone that carved out this bizarre new industry? Or were you perhaps a particularly astute and stubborn man riding an incoming tide of general economic expansion, increasing maritime trade, and a growing American interconnectedness with the Caribbean and southern states in the antebellum period? The truth, as it so often does, likely lies in a complex interplay of both your individual drive and the opportunities presented by a changing world. For now, though, you're too busy to ponder such future academic debates. You're laying foundations, both literal and commercial. The laughter from Boston hasn't entirely died down, but it's perhaps a little less confident now. The Ice King is no longer just a figure of fun. He's starting to look like he might actually know what he's doing, even if his chosen commodity still seems to many like selling snowflakes in a furnace. His competitors, when they eventually inevitably emerged, probably thought his secret weapon was a flock of highly trained, ice-preserving pigeons. So effective were his slowly improving methods. The tide is turning slowly but surely, like a massive ice floe beginning its inexorable drift. The early victories, hard won as they were, are now the bedrock upon which you, Frederick Tudor, begin to build an empire. The 1820s and 1830s unfold, and you are no longer the wide-eyed, somewhat desperate innovator scrambling for a foothold. You are a man with a system, a growing network, and an increasingly frosty grip on a market that you essentially willed into existence. Your operations expand like ice crystals forming on a winter pane. More southern cities in the United States, Charleston, Mobile, New Orleans, get their own Tudor-operated ice houses, elegant insulated temples to the god of cold. The Caribbean islands, once merely speculative destinations, become regular ports of call. Havana is a triumph, but now you set your sights on Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad. A regular, reliable ice trade route begins to solidify, with your ships, now often specially adapted for their chilly cargo, plying the waters with increasing frequency. A key development in this era is your strategic shift in sourcing your prime product. While Fresh Pond served you well initially, you discover Wenham Lake, near Salem, Massachusetts. The ice from Wenham Lake is exceptionally clear, dense, and beautiful. You recognize its potential not just as a refrigerant, but as a luxury brand. And so, Wenham Lake Ice is born. You begin to market it with a flair that would make a modern advertising executive nod in appreciation. It's not just frozen water, it's Wenham Lake Ice, the purest, the best. It becomes so famous that it's soon being shipped across the Atlantic, not just to the American South and the Caribbean, but to London itself, where it causes a sensation. You're essentially creating the 19th century equivalent of a viral marketing campaign, but with actual ice instead of cat videos. The entire business of harvesting, storing, and shipping ice matures under your exacting gaze. The rough and ready methods of the early days give way to a more scientific approach. You and your agents develop specialized tools, new ice plows that score the ice more deeply and evenly, horse-drawn cutters that are faster and more efficient, innovative lifting mechanisms. Your ice houses are no longer just insulated sheds, but carefully engineered structures, their designs refined year after year to maximize preservation. Even the way the ice is packed into the ships becomes a science, with air spaces and dunnage precisely arranged to promote the survival of the cargo. The price of ice, once wildly speculative, begins to stabilize as your supply chain becomes more reliable. Ice, in the cities you serve, starts to transform from an exotic luxury into an expected commodity. Of course, success breeds imitation. As your profits grow and the Ice King nickname takes on a genuine, if perhaps grudging, respect, other entrepreneurs start to cast envious glances at your frosty domain. Competition arises. Other merchants, seeing the money to be made, try to get in on the act, sourcing ice from different ponds or trying to undercut your prices. You meet these challenges with a characteristic blend of strategies. Sometimes you engage in fierce price wars, leveraging your established infrastructure and economies of scale to drive rivals out of business. Your competitors quickly learned that trying to undercut the Ice King was like trying to win a snowball fight against a glacier. Other times, You simply out-innovate them, improving your methods, securing exclusive contracts, and always pushing the quality and the brand of Tudor ice. Other merchants were probably still trying to figure out how to ship something that didn't actively try to disappear during transit, while you were already on version 3.0 of your ice shipping OS. By the 1830s and into the 1840s, the scale of your operation is truly staggering for the time. You are shipping tens of thousands of tons of ice annually. Ice boxes, rudimentary refrigerators, are becoming common in the homes of the well-to-do in cities like New Orleans and Havana, filled regularly by Tudor ice wagons. Taverns, restaurants, and hotels rely on your product. Hospitals use it for medical purposes, and it's even changing how perishable foods like butter and fresh produce can be transported and sold. You haven't just sold ice, you've fundamentally altered lifestyles and economies. Your flair for marketing takes on almost legendary proportions. One of your most famous, and possibly apocryphal, though it's a great story, promotional stunts involved sending a pristine block of Wenham Lake ice all the way to England as a gift to Queen Victoria herself. Imagine the scene: a massive, crystal clear emissary from a New England winter arriving at Buckingham Palace. Whether she used it to chill her tea is debatable, but the PR value was immense. You also understood the power of visual demonstration. You'd stage exhibits, for example, freezing a vibrant bouquet of fresh flowers inside a large block of your clearest ice. It would sit there, perfectly preserved and visible from all angles, a testament to the purity and preservative power of your product. It was Instagram worthy, 150 years before Instagram. Naturally, with the rise of Wenham Lake Ice as a premium brand, later historians would squint through their academic lenses and ponder its true nature. Was Wenham Lake Ice its genuinely, demonstrably superior in clarity and longevity to ice harvested from, say, Norway or other New England lakes that competitors began to exploit? Or was its celebrated status largely a testament to your brilliant marketing, your ability to create an aura of exclusivity and desirability around it? The debate continues, a gentle academic murmur beneath the clinking of phantom ice in long-ago glasses. It highlights that you weren't just an ice merchant, you were an ice impresario, selling not just a substance, but an idea, a sensation, a brand, and the world increasingly was buying it. Your ambition, Frederick, knows no icy bounds. The 1840s and 1850s see your ships, laden with their improbable cargo, venturing to the very ends of the earth. The jewel in the crown of these long-distance ventures is undoubtedly the voyage to Calcutta, India. It began back in 1833, a truly audacious undertaking. You loaded the brig Tuscany with 180 tons of prime Wenham Lake ice, insulated with your best methods, and dispatched it on a journey of nearly 16,000 miles. This wasn't just a trip down to the balmy Caribbean. This was a 4-month odyssey that would cross the equator not once, but twice. Imagine the skepticism, shipping ice to India through the sweltering doldrums and around the Cape of Good Hope. It sounded like a recipe for arriving with a hold full of very expensive, slightly musty water. Yet when the Tuscany arrived in Calcutta, a substantial portion of the ice, over 100 tons, remained intact. The British expatriates and wealthy Indians were astounded and ecstatic. It was a sensation. That first shipment yielded enormous profits, and India quickly became one of your most lucrative markets. You're basically running an international shipping empire powered by frozen water and sheer stubbornness. Your early investors who pulled out are probably still kicking themselves with their unchilled boots. Your life naturally has transformed. The days of desperate measures and debtor's prison are distant, almost unbelievable memories. You are now fabulously wealthy, one of the merchant princes of Boston. You reside in a fine mansion and own a splendid country estate, Sylvania, in Nahant, a rocky peninsula north of Boston. There, amidst the sea breezes, you indulge in another passion, horticulture. You conduct agricultural experiments, trying to grow exotic fruits and trees, perhaps a way of bringing the warmth of the tropics to your New England home, a curious inversion of your primary business. The contrast is stark. The man who sells winter to the world now seeks to cultivate summer's bounty in his own backyard. The impact of your ice trade is becoming profound, rippling through societies far beyond your direct reach. In the cities you serve, ice is evolving from a luxury to an essential. Diets are changing as fresh fish, meats, and dairy can be preserved for longer periods. Fruits and vegetables from distant regions become more readily available. Medical practices continue to benefit, with ice used to reduce fevers, alleviate pain, and preserve delicate medicines. New industries are even beginning to sprout, indirectly nurtured by the availability of reliable refrigeration. Breweries, for instance, find that chilled environments allow for better fermentation control, leading to more consistent and palatable beers. The foundations for a larger-scale chilled food industry are slowly being laid, brick by icy brick. By now, the idea of not having ice in your drink in cities like Charleston or Havana is considered almost barbaric, like listening to music on a gramophone with a woodpecker as the needle. Managing this sprawling global enterprise in the mid-19th century is a Herculean task. There's no email, no video conferencing, not even a reliable telegraph service to many of your distant outposts for much of this time. You rely on handwritten letters carried by sea, taking weeks or months to reach their destinations. You dispatch trusted agents to far-flung ports like Calcutta, Bombay, Singapore, and later even Hong Kong and Australia, as the natural ice trade reaches its peak tonnage in the mid to late 19th century. These agents are your eyes and ears, responsible for managing the ice houses, negotiating sales, and navigating complex local customs and fluctuating exchange rates. Political instability in some regions can suddenly upend carefully laid plans. It's a high-stakes game of logistical chess played across a global board. Your instructions to these agents are often a fascinating blend of shrewd business advice and rather eccentric personal counsel. You write them long, detailed letters, micromanaging from afar. These aren't just dry business directives. You advise them on how to maintain their health in challenging climates, how to dress to command respect, how to negotiate with different cultures, and even how to combat the inevitable loneliness and boredom of being stationed so far from home. Sometimes you would select and send crates of books to your agents, aiming to keep their minds stimulated and their spirits up, a sort of 19th century corporate wellness program curated by you, the Ice King himself. Your instructions to agents in Calcutta probably included something like, Rule 1, don't let the ice melt. Rule 2, seriously, don't let the ice melt. Rule 3, Try not to get eaten by a tiger. It's bad for business morale. As your icy network expands and the world marvels at New England ice appearing in the most unlikely of places, a quiet hum is beginning in workshops and laboratories, the sound of inventors tinkering with artificial refrigeration. The very success of your natural ice trade is creating a massive global demand for cold. This inevitably leads to a subtle but persistent academic debate for future historians. Did the remarkable efficiency and reach of the natural ice trade, spearheaded by your efforts, actually delay the widespread adoption of machine-made ice? Or conversely, did your creation of a worldwide market for refrigeration, your education of consumers about the benefits of ice, ultimately pave the way and create the perfect conditions for artificial ice to eventually supersede the natural product? It's a classic chicken and egg, or perhaps ice and icebox question. For now, however, natural ice reigns supreme, and you, Frederick Tudor, are its undisputed sovereign, your frosty influence felt from Boston to Bombay. The 1850s and the dawn of the 1860s represent the golden age of your reign, Frederick. You are, undeniably, the Ice King. Your ships crisscross the globe. Your ice houses stand as frosty sentinels in dozens of ports, and your name is synonymous with the once unthinkable luxury of readily available cold. You're so successful, you probably use $100 bills to insulate your own personal ice house, just for a laugh, though in truth, your legendary frugality and meticulousness would never allow such a flamboyant waste. Boston society, which once openly mocked your folly, now respectfully seeks your counsel and investment. You are a pillar of the establishment, a testament to Yankee ingenuity and perseverance. This era also sees a different side of you emerge. In 1844, at the age of 41, a seasoned bachelor by then, you marry Euphemia Fenno, a young woman of good standing. Together, you have 6 children, bringing a new dimension to your life, a warmth to balance the chill of your commercial empire. Your Nahant estate, Sylvania, becomes not just a place for horticultural experiments, but a family home, echoing with sounds beyond the rustle of investment papers and shipping manifests. It's a reminder that even empire builders have personal lives, moments of quiet domesticity amidst the relentless drive of business. Meanwhile, the source of your wealth, the ice plantations of New England, operate on an astonishing scale. Imagine Wenham Lake or Fresh Pond in the depths of winter. They are transformed into bustling industrial sites. Hundreds, sometimes thousands of men are employed in the harvest. The crisp winter air rings with the rhythmic scrape of horse-drawn plows, scoring the ice into a vast, glittering grid. You hear the rasp of enormous hand saws, wielded by hardy men in thick coats and mittens, cutting along the score lines. Steam engines, a relatively new innovation, sometimes power conveyor belts that lift the massive, glistening blocks, often 2 to 3 feet thick and weighing hundreds of pounds, from the frigid water into huge, barn-like ice houses that line the shores. These are not quaint, rustic operations. They are highly organized, efficient factories of cold, entire communities rising and falling with the seasonal rhythm of the freeze and the harvest. Your rivals trying to compete with your Wenham Lake ice were often accused of selling imposter cycles, so dominant was your brand. Yet even at this zenith, new challenges gather like clouds on a distant horizon. Competition is fiercer than ever. not just from other natural ice merchants scrambling for a piece of the lucrative pie, but from a new, almost insidious threat: artificial ice. Throughout the mid 19th century, inventors in various countries had been experimenting with mechanical refrigeration. The earliest machines are bulky, inefficient, sometimes dangerous, and the ice they produce is often cloudy and expensive. Hearing about the first machines making ice, oh, you probably scoffed and said, "Artificial ice? What's next? Artificial daylight? Horses that fly?" It seemed that ridiculous compared to the pure, clear, abundant product you could shave off a New England lake. Your business acumen, however, is not to be underestimated. You are meticulous in all things. One of your enduring quirks, and a key to your success, is your legendary dislike for lawyers, despite coming from a family that included them, and despite your own frequent involvement in litigation to protect your patents and contracts. You preferred straightforward dealing and ironclad agreements, finding the obfuscations of the legal profession an unnecessary and expensive frustration. This strong-willed, sometimes cantankerous nature extends to every detail of your business, right down to the quality of the sawdust used for insulation. It had to be dry, preferably from pine, and free of impurities, as the wrong kind could taint the ice or reduce its insulating properties. The shadow of machine-made ice, however, begins to lengthen. While initially too costly for most markets you dominate, it starts finding niches. In extremely distant ports, where even your ice ships struggle to deliver a profitable cargo, or in places with a desperate need for on-demand cooling, like breweries in warmer climates or isolated hospitals, these newfangled contraptions begin to make inroads. Your reaction to this nascent technology is a subject of keen interest for historians. Did you dismiss it too readily, blinded by the success of your natural ice empire? Were you too set in your ways, too invested in the vast infrastructure of harvesting, shipping, and storing natural ice to pivot towards the new technology? Or did you, with your characteristic shrewdness, simply calculate that natural ice remained superior in quality and cost-effectiveness for the bulk of the market for as long as was feasible? Historians continue to debate your adaptability in this changing landscape. Some argue that your focus remained resolutely on perfecting the natural ice trade, perhaps missing the early signals of a technological shift that would eventually render your entire industry obsolete. Others suggest you were a pragmatist, maximizing the potential of your established methods while the new technology slowly found its footing. What is certain is that the world of cold is on the cusp of a revolution, and even the mighty Ice King cannot hold back the tide of innovation forever. For now, though, the banners of Tudor ice still fly high, and the world still marvels at the winter you sell. The late 1850s roll into the early 1860s, and though your ice empire, Frederick, still gleams under the sun, an inevitable thaw has begun. The artificial ice machines, once clunky novelties, are becoming more efficient, more reliable. Their advantages are undeniable. Ice produced on-site, on demand, without the vagaries of New England winters, the perils of long sea voyages, or the massive logistical ballet of harvesting and storage. The new ice machines were like those annoying little startups that actually have a good idea, much to the chagrin of established empires like yours. While natural ice, especially your famed Wenham Lake brand, often remains cheaper and is still lauded for its clarity, the convenience of manufactured ice starts to chip away at your market share, particularly in distant or isolated locales. Then comes a cataclysm that shakes the very foundations of the nation and your business, the American Civil War, erupting in 1861. Your lucrative southern markets, from Charleston to New Orleans, are suddenly behind enemy lines. Union blockades choke off maritime trade. The carefully constructed network of ice houses and distribution systems in the Confederacy is severed. This is a devastating blow. Not only is a huge portion of your revenue gone, but the war also accelerates the South's adoption of artificial ice technology out of sheer necessity. They can't get your ice, so they have to make their own. It's a stark example of how conflict can spur technological adoption. During these tumultuous years, you are also contending with the relentless march of time on a more personal level. You are entering your late 70s. The fierce energy that drove you to defy doubters and conquer markets is perhaps tempered now by age and a body that has endured much. You see the world you shaped beginning to change in fundamental ways. The very industry you single-handedly created is now facing a future where nature-harvested cold might become a relic. Trying to explain to your young children, and eventually your grandkids, that you used to cut ice out of a lake with horses and ship it around the world probably made you sound like you were telling a fantastical fairy tale, perhaps one involving ice trolls and mischievous frozen pond gnomes. Yet the natural ice trade is a resilient beast. It doesn't simply vanish overnight. Your Tudor Ice Company, a titan of the industry, continues to operate, supplying northern domestic markets and many international ports where natural ice still holds a cost or quality advantage. The infrastructure is vast, the methods honed over decades. For many years to come, the clatter of ice wagons and the sight of massive glistening blocks being loaded onto ships or into neighborhood ice boxes will remain a familiar part of life in many cities. But for you, Frederick Tudor, the long winter of your life is drawing to a close. In your later years, you endure a painful and debilitating affliction. Gangrene develops in one of your legs. It's a cruel irony for a man who built his fortune on preserving things from decay. Despite the constant pain and reduced mobility, your mind remains sharp, your will indomitable. You continue to oversee your business affairs from your Boston home, dictating letters, reviewing accounts, offering counsel, a frost-bitten old lion still commanding his pride as much as his failing body allows. Your doctors, perhaps using ice, your ice, to try and alleviate your symptoms and cool your fevers, must have felt a certain poignant irony, though hopefully they maintained their professional composure. On February 6th, 1864, with the Civil War still raging and the future of the ice trade balanced on a knife edge between the old ways and the new, you, Frederick Tudor, the Ice King, breathe your last in Boston. You are 80 years old. You have lived to see your youthful, ridiculed folly blossom into a global industry, changing the way the world ate, drank, and healed. Your company, the Tudor Ice Company, will continue under new management, a testament to the solid foundations you laid. The decline of the natural ice trade, which you witnessed the beginnings of, raises questions that historians still ponder. Was its eventual demise purely a matter of technological obsolescence, the inevitable victory of machine-made ice? Or did other factors play equally significant roles? Some argue that increasing pollution of the lakes and rivers used for harvesting made natural ice less appealing and more dangerous over time. Rising labor costs for the intensive harvesting process also squeezed profit margins. And of course, the massive disruptions caused by events like the Civil War irrevocably altered trade patterns and spurred innovation in alternative technologies. It was likely a confluence of all these forces, a slow melt rather than a sudden shatter, that led to the eventual fading of the great natural ice age you had so masterfully ushered in. Frederick Tudor was gone, but the world he had fundamentally altered, the world that now craved and expected cold, lived on. His legacy wasn't just the Tudor Ice Company, which continued to operate for many decades, a formidable player in a slowly shrinking game. His true legacy was the very idea he had planted in the global consciousness, that winter's chill was not confined to a season or a latitude, but could be a commodity, a comfort, a tool, accessible almost anywhere on Earth. He had laid the groundwork for modern food preservation, transformed beverage culture, aided medical practice, and even subtly reshaped global trade routes by demonstrating the feasibility of long-distance perishable transport, albeit of a very unique kind of perishable. The decades following his death in 1864 saw the long, slow twilight of the natural ice trade. It was a fighting retreat, not a sudden collapse. The sheer scale of the existing infrastructure, the ice houses, the specialized tools, the fleets of ships, the generations of know-how, meant that natural ice remained competitive in many markets for a surprisingly long time. The Tudor Ice Company, and others like it, continued to harvest glittering blocks from frozen New England ponds and ship them south and across the seas. The annual ice harvest remained a significant, if diminishing, feature of New England life well into the late 19th and the early 20th centuries. But the hum of the ice-making machines grew louder, their efficiency improved, their costs decreased. Artificial ice plants began to appear in more and more cities, first supplementing, then supplanting the natural product. No longer did a Louisiana hotelier have to anxiously await a schooner from Boston. He could have an ice plant built right next door. The uncertainty of the natural harvest, a mild winter could mean an ice famine, was eliminated. The long, costly, and sometimes perilous supply chains were drastically shortened. The final curtain fell on the large-scale commercial natural ice trade, mostly by the 1920s and 1930s. By then, electric home refrigerators were becoming increasingly common, and commercial ice plants using advanced refrigeration technology could produce ice far more predictably and often more cheaply than it could be cut from a distant pond and shipped hundreds or thousands of miles. The great wooden ice houses that once lined the shores of Wenham Lake and Fresh Pond, capable of holding tens of thousands of tons of winter's bounty, gradually fell into disuse. Some burned down, others rotted away, their massive timbers collapsing into romantic ruins, quiet monuments to a bygone era. The old ice houses, once crucial pieces of global infrastructure, eventually became quaint backdrops for local legends, or perhaps, in a more modern twist, the inspiration for particularly drafty wedding venues. Yet, even as machine-made ice became ubiquitous, a certain nostalgia, a peculiar fondness, lingered for the natural article. Some old-timers, and even some discerning consumers, would swear that natural ice was somehow better, that it was colder, lasted longer, or had a purer taste than the manufactured product. It was an echo of the same marketing genius Frederick Tudor himself had employed, the idea that ice wasn't just frozen water, but something with character and provenance. These lingering sentiments, however, couldn't halt the march of progress. The natural ice trade finally melted into history, leaving behind a world that could never again imagine enduring a sweltering summer's day without the expectation of a cool, refreshing drink, a world that had, in a way, become dependent on the very folly Tudor had championed. And how is Frederick Tudor himself remembered? The title, the Ice King, once bestowed in jest, became his undisputed epithet, a recognition of his singular, transformative achievement. He remains a complex figure for historians. Was he primarily a brilliant visionary, a persistent innovator who brought untold comfort and economic benefit to millions? Or was he a ruthless capitalist, a shrewd monopolist who crushed competitors and exploited markets for personal gain? The truth, as with most such titans of industry, is likely a nuanced blend of all these things. He was undoubtedly a man of incredible foresight, stubbornness, and meticulous attention to detail, a quintessential 19th century entrepreneur who saw an impossible opportunity and through sheer force of will made it a reality. If Frederick Tudor could see a modern smart fridge dispensing perfectly uniform ice cubes with a simple voice command, he'd probably first try to calculate its efficiency down to the penny, then demand a royalty for the foundational concept, and finally try to figure out how to ship the entire internet to Calcutta just to see if it could be done. His restless, inventive, and undeniably frosty spirit helped shape the modern world, one shipload of winter at a time. Now, as our story of the Ice King and his chilly empire draws to a close, let the images of those vast, glistening ice fields, the creak of the laden ships, and the cool relief of a long-ago tropical evening begin to soften and fade. Let the details blur, like breath on a cold window pane. The world outside your quiet space continues its own rhythms, its own cycles of warming and cooling, of effort and rest. But here, in this moment, there is only the gentle cadence of your own breath, the feeling of release as you let go of the day. Allow your thoughts to drift like snowflakes carried on a gentle breeze, each one unique, each one finding its own place to settle, softly, quietly. Feel the support beneath you, a solid, comforting presence, allowing your muscles to grow heavy, loose, and deeply relaxed. Imagine a cool, soft mist gently enveloping you, not the harsh cold of a New England winter, but a soothing, refreshing coolness that whispers of peace and deep, untroubled sleep. There are no more problems to solve, no more challenges to meet, only the gentle pull of slumber inviting you into its embrace. Every breath out is a sigh of relief, a letting go, a sinking deeper into tranquility. The stories are told, the day is done. Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into a story so peculiar, so wonderfully obscure, it feels like it was misplaced by history itself, tucked away in the folds of an old map. Picture a tiny sliver of land, a forgotten footnote in the grand Italian narrative, a place that for nearly 400 years simply was. Imagine you're wandering through the rolling hills of Umbria, the Italian sun warming your face, and you stumble upon a village where the old folks still tell tales of a time when they answered to no king, no pope, no government but their own quirky, unwritten rules. This is the story of Kospaya, the accidental republic, a place that thrived on a cartographer's blunder and a very particular, very profitable plant. You know, if you were suddenly dropped into 15th century Italy with its shifting allegiances and rather potent plagues, you probably wouldn't survive this kind of delightful administrative oversight for long. Your modern sensibilities about clearly defined borders and, well, paying taxes would just be confusing. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go on, a little click, it helps more than you know. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear where you're listening from tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always a quiet thrill to know how far these stories travel. Now let's dim the lights, turn on your fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin tonight's journey together. Act 1. You find yourself standing on a gentle slope, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. It's the early 15th century, around 1440, and you're in the heart of Italy, in a region that will later be known as Umbria. The landscape around you is a tapestry of greens and browns, small, cultivated plots of land interspersed with dense woodlands. In the distance, you can just make out the stone walls of a larger town, but here it's all sleepy hamlets and winding dirt paths. This isn't the Italy of grand Renaissance cities at the peak of their splendor, just yet, not for this tiny patch of earth. This is the borderland, a somewhat fuzzy concept back then. To your north, metaphorically speaking, lies the ambitious Republic of Florence, a rising power, flexing its commercial and political muscles. To your south, the Papal States, a sprawling territory ruled by the Pope, a spiritual leader who also wields considerable earthly power. These two entities are, to put it mildly, frenemies. They negotiate, they trade, they occasionally skirmish, and they are constantly redrawing the lines of their influence, sometimes with swords, sometimes with treaties, and sometimes, as you're about to discover, with a charming degree of human error. Our story begins with a sale, a rather significant transaction. Pope Eugene IV, needing funds, decided to sell the town and territory of Borgo San Sepolcro to the Republic of Florence. This happened in 1441. Now, selling territory isn't like selling a used chariot. It requires maps, surveyors, and clearly defined boundaries. The agreement stipulated that the new border would run along a small river, a modest stream known simply as Rio. You can almost picture the scene: a couple of surveyors, perhaps a Florentine and a papal representative, sweating under the Italian sun, swatting away flies, and trying to agree on which insignificant trickle of water they were supposed to be following. "This Rio, right?" one might have said, pointing vaguely. "Si, the Rio," the other might have replied, already thinking about lunch and a good Chianti. Here's where the delightful little hiccup occurs. It turns out there wasn't just one stream named Rio in the area. Oh no, that would be too simple. There were two streams, both bearing the same unassuming name, running roughly parallel to each other, but separated by a narrow strip of land, a little valley about 2 kilometers long and perhaps 500 meters wide. One stream flowed a bit further north, the other a bit further south. When the treaty was signed and the new maps were drawn, the Florentines based their claim on the northern Rio, while the Papal States drew their line along the southern Rio. And the land in between, this slender lozenge of territory nestled between the two rione, plural for Rio, just to keep things interesting, was, well, it wasn't on anyone's map officially. It was a geographical oversight, a cartographical oopsie. This oversight created a tiny, unclaimed pocket of land. It wasn't much, just a few hundred acres, perhaps home to a handful of families who were probably more concerned with their olive groves and grapevines than with the grand geopolitical chess match happening around them. They likely had no idea that a bureaucratic slip-up was about to make their lives rather unique. This is the mainstream historical fact we can anchor ourselves to. The sale of Borgo San Sepolcro in 1441 and the subsequent boundary dispute arising from the ambiguously named streams created the vacuum that would become Cospaya. Now, for a quirky little detail, imagine the local folks. One day they're subjects of the Pope, the next they're supposed to be under Florentine rule, but then nothing happens. No Florentine tax collectors show up. No papal guards patrol their paths. Life just continues. It must have been a period of cautious confusion. Do we pay taxes to Florence? To Rome? Do we just not? The last option probably started to sound increasingly attractive. It's like when your parents go away for the weekend and accidentally forget to leave a list of chores. Freedom, sweet, unexpected freedom. Historians still debate the exact nature of this error. Was it a genuine, innocent mistake, born of vague geographical knowledge, and perhaps one too many flagons of wine during surveying expeditions? Or, as some scholars suggest, was it a more calculated, if subtle, oversight? Perhaps one side, or even both, recognized the ambiguity, but chose not to clarify it immediately, hoping to exploit this tiny sliver of undefined land later for some unforeseen advantage, maybe a bit of light smuggling, or a useful neutral meeting point. The records from the time are, unsurprisingly, a little hazy on whose Rio was the real Rio. It's one of those delightful historical mysteries where the truth is likely buried under centuries of local legend and the dust of forgotten archives. You can almost hear the scholars now. Well, if you examine the fluvial geomorphology of the upper Tiber Valley in the mid-15th century, while everyone else just pictures two guys shrugging over a map. Okay, so there you are, in this little strip of land, this geographical oopsie nestled between two streams and two major powers. The initial confusion among the inhabitants must have been palpable. Imagine the village chatter, the hushed conversations over evening meals. Did you hear? Giovanni from down the valley said the Florentines are our new masters. No, no. Old Maria insists we still belong to the Pope. Her cousins saw a papal legate near the South Stream. Weeks turn into months. No Florentine banners are raised. No papal decrees are posted. The only authority seems to be the rhythm of the seasons and the needs of the land. It's at this point that the people of this valley, soon to be known as the Cospaioli, start to look at each other with a dawning realization. They are, it seems, forgotten. Not in a tragic way, like a lost puppy, but more like that leftover slice of pizza in the back of the fridge that everyone assumes someone else will eat. Except this pizza slice is a rather lovely piece of fertile Italian countryside, and the Cospaioli are starting to think, well, if no one's claiming us, you have to understand, these weren't revolutionaries storming a palace. There were no grand declarations penned by candlelight, no fiery speeches about liberty and self-determination in the village square. If there even was a formal village square at this point, it was far more organic, far more Italian, in a wonderfully pragmatic way. They just sort of became. They continued to till their fields, tend their livestock, marry, have children, and bury their dead, all without the usual paperwork and permissions from a higher authority. It was less a declaration of independence and more a collective unspoken shrug of, well, this is us now. This gradual dawning and acceptance of their unique status, their de facto independence emerging around 1441, is our next solid historical footing. There wasn't a specific Independence Day with fireworks and parades. It was more of a slow, creeping realization that they were on their own and that perhaps this wasn't such a bad thing after all. The early days of Cospaya must have been fascinatingly informal. How do you govern a territory that technically doesn't exist in the eyes of its powerful neighbors? You do it very, very carefully, and very simply. There was no Cospayan army, no navy. The two Rione streams weren't exactly conducive to seafaring. No complex bureaucracy. Decisions were likely made by consensus among the heads of families, perhaps a council of elders who gathered when needed, probably under a large tree or in the most spacious barn. The bridge over the North Rio needs repairing. Agreed. Everyone who uses it chips in with labor or materials. Someone's goats are eating my cabbages. Talk to him. If he doesn't listen, we'll all talk to him. It was community governance at its most basic. Think of it as a very small, very exclusive homeowners association, but with better scenery and absolutely no membership fees in the form of taxes. Can you imagine? No income tax, no property tax, no sales tax. It sounds like a modern libertarian's dream, albeit with significantly worse dental care. One of the most defining characteristics of early Cospaya, and indeed for much of its existence, was its lack of formal laws, and crucially, no taxes. Why would there be? Who would they pay taxes to? Themselves? It didn't make much sense. This absence of fiscal burden was understandably quite popular with the inhabitants. It also, as you can imagine, started to make Cospaya a rather interesting place for people from the surrounding heavily taxed regions. Not a flood, mind you, but a trickle. Perhaps a cousin from Florentine territory who was tired of levies, or a distant relative from the Papal States who just wanted a bit more breathing room. Our quirky detail here is the likely sheer bewilderment, followed by a sort of grudging acceptance from the Florentine and Papal authorities. Imagine the reports trickling back to Florence or Rome. Your Holiness, about that strip of land near San Sepolcro, it seems the people there are, well, they're just sort of being. And are they paying homage to Florence? Not as such, Your Holiness. Are they causing trouble? Not particularly, Your Holiness. They mostly seem to be farming. You can picture a frustrated papal secretary or a Florentine magistrate just throwing their hands up. The territory was too small to be a real threat, too insignificant to justify the expense and hassle of a military intervention to correct a minor surveying error. It was easier to just let it be, this tiny anomaly on their border. Perhaps it even became a bit of a local joke in the chanceries of Florence and Rome. Ah, Cospia, the land that bureaucracy forgot. Now, the scholarly debate around this period often revolves around how conscious and collective the Cospaioli's assertion of independence truly was. Was there a pivotal meeting, a specific moment where someone stood up and said, "Right, we are the Republic of Cospia, and we answer to no one"? Or was it a much more gradual, almost accidental drift into autonomy, a slow coalescing of shared identity born out of their unique circumstances? Some historians lean towards the idea of a more definite, if informal, decision by the inhabitants to exploit their status, while others suggest it was simply a case of inertia and benign neglect from their larger neighbors that allowed this unusual state of affairs to solidify over decades. It's like asking when exactly a path in a field becomes an official trail. Is it the first person who walks it, the 10th, the 100th? Or is it only when someone finally puts up a little sign? For Cospia, the sign never really went up in those early years. They just became the path. Life continued. The sun rose and set over the valley. The Cospaioli, free from external governance and taxation, developed their own ways of doing things. Their isolation, paradoxically, became their strength. They were too small to bother, too self-contained to disrupt the larger flow of Italian politics. They were, for all intents and purposes, invisible to the wider world, a tiny bubble of autonomy. And in this bubble, a unique culture began to form, one that valued independence not as a lofty ideal, but as a simple, everyday reality. It's quite something to think that while Machiavelli was advising princes on how to acquire and maintain power, there was a tiny community just a stone's throw away that had acquired its power by simply being overlooked. You almost want to send a memo back in time. Dear Niccolo, have you considered just finding a faulty map? The population was never large, a few hundred souls at most in these early centuries. They would have known everyone, every family connection, every dispute over a wandering pig or a poorly maintained fence. This intimacy likely helped maintain social order in the absence of formal laws or a police force. Peer pressure in a tiny village can be a far more effective deterrent than a distant king's decree. And so, Cospia settled into its peculiar existence, a tiny republic born not of revolution, but of a surveyor's shrug, quietly cultivating its gardens and its unique status, blissfully unaware of the golden, smoky future that was slowly drifting its way across the Atlantic. Okay, let's transition forward a bit, you and I. Decades have passed in Cospia. The memory of that original boundary disputes is now a tale told by grandparents. The Cospaioli have become accustomed to their quiet autonomy, their little pocket of no man's land, or rather, their land. The rhythm of life is still dictated by the seasons, by planting and harvesting. But across the vast Atlantic, a new plant is making its journey, a plant that will inadvertently transform this tiny, forgotten republic into something of a legend, or at least a very smoky footnote in agricultural history. You're now in the mid to late 16th century. The world is changing. Columbus has sailed. New continents are being discovered by Europeans. And with these discoveries come new goods, new foods, and new habits. One of these is tobacco. It arrives in Europe as an exotic curiosity, brought back by sailors and explorers from the Americas. Initially, it's touted for its medicinal properties. People are literally sniffing it up, hoping to cure everything from headaches to, well, probably not the plague, but they were optimistic. The French ambassador to Portugal, a fellow named Jean Nicot, yes, that Nicot, from whom we get the word nicotine, was instrumental in popularizing it in the French court around 1560, sending seeds and leaves to the Queen, Catherine de' Medici, as a wonder drug. From France, its popularity and its seeds began to spread like, well, smoke in a crowded room. Soon enough, tobacco makes its way to the Italian peninsula. It's new, it's fashionable among some circles, and it's viewed with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. The mainstream historical fact here is that Cospaya, due to its unique status, became one of the very first places in Italy, if not the first, to begin cultivating tobacco in earnest, probably around the mid-1560s. While larger states were still figuring out what this plant was, whether to tax it, ban it, or praise it, the Cospaioli, with no central authority to ask for permission or to impose duties, just saw another crop, a potentially profitable one. They specifically started growing a hardy variety called Nicotiana rustica, which was potent stuff, not your smooth, mellow Virginia blend, but it grew well in the Italian soil. Imagine the first Cospayan farmer who got his hands on a few tobacco seeds. Maybe a traveling merchant passed through, someone who'd picked them up in a port city. Or perhaps a Cospayan with a bit of wanderlust ventured out and returned with this botanical novelty. There's no grand record, no tobacco proclamation of Cospaya. One day it's just wheat and olives. The next, someone's experimenting with these broad, sticky leaves. Hey Beppe, what's that funny-smelling plant you've got there? No idea, but the merchants in the city are paying good money for it, and it keeps the aphids off my tomatoes. It's easy to picture the trial and error, the Cospaioli learning how to cure the leaves, perhaps initially drying them a bit too much over smoky fires, creating a truly robust product. Now for a wonderfully quirky detail, the Pope's relationship with tobacco was, shall we say, complicated. Initially, as mentioned, some in the church saw it as having medicinal value. There's a story that Cardinal Prospero Publicola Santa Croce first introduced smoking to the Papal States around 1561 after serving as a nuncio in Portugal, believing it to be a panacea. But tastes and opinions change. Later, popes took a much dimmer view. Pope Urban VIII, in 1624, issued a papal bull excommunicating anyone who took tobacco in any holy place. Can you imagine being excommunicated for sneaking a pinch of snuff during a long sermon? He felt it led to sneezing and other unholy expectorations. Clement XI in 1724 would later establish a papal tobacco monopoly, because if you can't beat them, tax them. This vacillation by the major power to their south was Cospaya's golden opportunity. While Rome was dithering, Cospaya was cultivating. This brings us to a point of scholarly debate. Who exactly brought the first tobacco seeds to Cospaya, and did they immediately grasp the enormous economic potential? Was it a stroke of entrepreneurial genius by some unknown Cospayan visionary who saw the future in those tiny seeds? Or was it more of a lucky accident, a case of, let's plant this weird new thing and see what happens, only for it to take off beyond their wildest dreams? Some argue for a more deliberate introduction, suggesting that the Cospaioli, already living in a tax-free haven, were astute enough to recognize a cash crop that would be unburdened by the usual duties. Others believe it was more serendipitous, a gradual realization, as demand from outside their little valley grew. It's probably a bit of both, a mix of, let's try this, and wait, people will pay how much for this stuff? You can almost feel the shift in the valley. The traditional crops are still there, but more and more land is being given over to these broad-leafed tobacco plants. The scent of curing tobacco leaves starts to mingle with the smell of wood smoke and baking bread. Cospaya, the accidental republic, is on the cusp of becoming the accidental tobacconist to a significant chunk of Italy. They had no idea that their little geographical anomaly, their freedom from oversight, was perfectly positioning them to capitalize on Europe's newfound craving for nicotine. It's a bit like finding out your quiet, unassuming village happens to be sitting on a giant deposit of chocolate, just as the world develops an insatiable sweet tooth. The Cospaioli were about to hit the jackpot, one smoky leaf at a time, and all because, centuries ago, two surveyors couldn't agree on which little stream was the right little stream. History, eh? It has a funny way of rewarding ambiguity. Okay, so the seeds are sown, literally and figuratively. Cospaya is now in the tobacco game, and business, as they say, is about to pick up. You're witnessing the transformation of this sleepy agrarian micro-republic into something of an economic powerhouse, at least on a very local, very specific scale. As tobacco use spread across Italy and the rest of Europe, so did attempts by various states to control it, tax it, or outright ban it. The Papal States, as we've seen, had their on-again, off-again relationship with the leaf. The Grand Duchy of Tuscany, Florence's successor state to the north, also eyed tobacco as a potential source of revenue, and therefore something to be heavily regulated. And this is precisely where Cospaya's unique situation became its superpower. With no sovereign to impose duties, no customs officials to bribe or evade, at least not within its own tiny borders, Cospaya became a beacon for tobacco growers and traders. This role as a de facto free port, a tax-free zone for the cultivation and initial sale of tobacco, is a key historical fact. Suddenly, this forgotten strip of land was very much on the map for a certain kind of entrepreneur. The fields around you in Cospaya are now increasingly dominated by the broad green leaves of Nicotiana rustica. The air, especially during curing season, is thick with its pungent, earthy aroma. You see more activity, more unfamiliar faces passing through, merchants, traders, some looking a bit shifty, others more legitimate, all drawn by the promise of Cospayan tobacco, unburdened by the tithes and taxes of the surrounding territories. The Cospaioli themselves are becoming more prosperous. Their simple homes might see a few modest improvements. Perhaps they can afford better tools, a new coat, or an extra bottle of wine for the table. They weren't building golden palaces, but there was a definite uptick in their standard of living. It's like that one house on the block that always has the best Halloween candy. Suddenly, it's the most popular destination. Cospaya became the place for full-flavored tobacco, untaxed and unregulated. Now, about those quirky tobacco laws mentioned in our imaginary show title. The quirkiest thing about them was their almost complete absence. The law in Cospaya was essentially grow it, cure it, sell it. There were no quality controls enforced by a government agency, No age restrictions, though common sense probably prevailed. No marketing regulations. This lack of red tape was, of course, a huge part of its appeal. If you wanted to try a new curing method, blend your tobacco with local herbs for a unique flavor, or just sell it as strong as nature made it, Cospaya was your place. This freedom, however, also meant it was a bit of a Wild West for tobacco. Buyer beware was likely the prevailing principle. You might get a fantastic batch one day, and something that tastes like old socks the next. Our quirky detail for this section has to be the image of tiny Cospaya developing its own unique tobacco brands or reputations, even if informal. Perhaps old Nonna Emily's snuff was renowned for its potency, or Rio Seco blend, named after one of their founding streams, perhaps with a wink, was the go-to for a strong smoke. You can imagine Cospayan families taking great pride in their particular methods of cultivation and curing, their secrets passed down through generations. These weren't products with fancy labels or government health warnings. May cause excessive coughing and temporary social ostracization, but word-of-mouth reputations that traveled with the merchants. The valley itself became a brand. With this newfound prosperity, did Cospayan society become more structured? Slightly, perhaps, but it never developed the elaborate bureaucracy of its neighbors. The council of elders or heads of families likely still made important decisions, but now those decisions might involve disputes over tobacco prices or the allocation of prime growing land rather than just wandering goats. There's no record of them suddenly appointing a minister of tobacco or a grand chancellor of the leaf. The informal nature of their governance persisted. It was part of their charm and part of their business model. They were, in a sense, the artisanal, unregulated tobacco capital of central Italy. I bet if you asked a Cospayan farmer for his business plan, he'd just hold up a sun-cured tobacco leaf and grin. This leads us to a fascinating scholarly debate. To what extent was Cospaya's prosperity solely due to tobacco? While tobacco was undoubtedly the main engine of its economy, its status as an ungoverned, tax-free territory likely attracted other forms of, shall we say, customs-flexible trade. Were other goods passing through Cospaya to avoid duties? Almost certainly. It was a natural conduit for contraband. Historians discuss whether Cospaya was a pure tobacco republic or more of a general free trade zone where tobacco just happened to be the star player. It's likely the latter. If you could avoid paying a hefty tax on something by routing it through this little valley, why wouldn't you? So while the Cospaioli were diligently farming their Nicotiana rustica, their republic might also have been facilitating a quiet trade in other desirable and taxable goods. They probably weren't running a massive smuggling empire, more like a convenient, discreet back door. Need some salt, silk, or spices without the usual papal markup? Luigi in Cospaya knows a guy. The population of Cospaya grew, though it always remained small, perhaps peaking at around 500 to 600 people. This influx, drawn by the tobacco boom, would have subtly changed the social fabric. New families arrived, new skills, perhaps new tensions. But the core identity of Cospaya as this independent, self-reliant community seems to have persisted. They were the Republic of Smokers, not just because they grew and sold tobacco, but because their entire existence was wreathed in the hazy, profitable, and slightly rebellious aroma of this New World plant. They had, quite accidentally, found their niche, and it was a smoky one. And for a while, it was very, very good. Okay, so Cospaya is humming along, a tiny enclave buzzing with the business of tobacco. The fields are green with it, the barns are fragrant with it, and the pockets of the Cospaioli are, if not jingling with gold, at least comfortably lined with the proceeds of their unique agricultural enterprise. But what was it actually like to live there, day in and day out, in this peculiar little republic that shouldn't exist? You're walking through Cospaya now, perhaps in the 17th or early 18th century, during its most prosperous period. The paths are well trodden, not just by locals, but by traders and merchants leading mules laden with goods. You see children playing, perhaps using discarded tobacco leaves in their games. Look, Mama, I'm a customs official, much to the amusement of their parents. The houses are still modest, built of local stone, but they're well maintained. There's a sense of purpose, of a community that knows its worth. Daily life, for many, revolved around the agricultural calendar, but with a strong emphasis on the demanding cultivation of tobacco, planting, weeding, topping, suckering, harvesting, and the crucial, often secretive, curing processes. It was hard work, no doubt, but it was their work for their profit. The benefits of living in Cospaya were obvious. No taxes, no conscription into distant wars fought by popes or grand dukes, and a general sense of being master of your own destiny. If you were enterprising and willing to work, Cospaya offered a unique opportunity. You could experiment with your crops, strike your own deals, and keep what you earned. This freedom was a powerful draw. However, there were challenges too. The lack of a formal legal system meant that disputes had to be settled through community pressure or by the Council of Elders. What happened if someone refused to abide by their judgment? Justice could be swift and informal, or perhaps sometimes elusive. And while being overlooked by big powers was a blessing, it also meant a lack of protection. If a band of brigands decided Cospaya was an easy target, there was no army to call upon. Self-reliance was not just a virtue, it was a necessity. Don't like it? There's the North Rio, and there's the South Rio. Pick one and start walking. Might have been the unspoken Cospayan dispute resolution method for truly intractable disagreements. Interactions with neighboring states were a delicate dance. Officially, Cospaya didn't exist on their maps as a sovereign entity. Unofficially, they knew all about it. The Papal States and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany tolerated Cospaya, partly because it was so small, and partly because, well, powerful people in those states probably enjoyed the untaxed Cospayan tobacco as much as anyone else. It was a kind of don't ask, don't tell policy. As long as Cospaya didn't cause too much trouble, didn't become a haven for actual dangerous criminals, just industrious smugglers, which was different, apparently. It was allowed to continue its quirky existence. They were a nuisance, perhaps, to customs officials losing out on revenue, but also a source of high quality, or at least highly potent, tobacco. Envy? Maybe a little, from the heavily taxed peasants in the surrounding lands. You can imagine a Tuscan farmer grumbling, those Cospaioli, living free and easy, while I'm breaking my back to pay the Duke's new window tax. This brings us to a significant historical fact: the sheer longevity of Cospaya's independence. It lasted from 1441 until 1826. That's nearly 400 years, 4 centuries of existing in a crack in the system. Think about all the major European wars, the rise and fall of empires, the sweeping changes in art, science, and philosophy that occurred during that time. And through it all, this tiny valley just kept on being Cospaya, quietly growing its tobacco. It outlasted countless treaties, papal decrees, and political dynasties. It's a testament to the power of being simultaneously insignificant and incredibly useful. For a quirky detail, consider the kinds of people beyond tobacco traders who might have found Cospaya attractive. With no formal extradition treaties, because who would you sign a treaty with, Cospaya likely became a discreet, temporary refuge for individuals who had reasons to leave their previous place of residence rather quickly. Not necessarily hardened criminals, but perhaps debtors, political dissenters on a very minor scale, or young lovers fleeing disapproving families. You can picture a character in a picaresque novel making a strategic detour through the free territory of Cospaya to let the heat die down. It probably wasn't a major sanctuary for outlaws. The Cospaioli themselves wouldn't have tolerated anything that threatened their delicate ecosystem, but for minor transgressions, it offered a useful blind spot on the map. My landlord in Perugia is being unreasonable about the rent. I think I'll go visit my cousin in Cospaya for a few months and help with the tobacco harvest. The reputation of Cospaya was therefore mixed. To some, it was a symbol of rustic freedom and entrepreneurial spirit. To others, it was a den of smugglers, tax evaders, and producers of a dangerously unregulated weed. The truth, as always, probably lay somewhere in between. This leads to an ongoing scholarly debate. What was the true quality of life in Cospaya? Was it an idyllic libertarian paradise, a haven of peaceful, prosperous anarchy? Or was it a more precarious, somewhat lawless frontier town, where the lack of formal structures could also mean a lack of security and justice? Historians examine scant records and anecdotal evidence to piece together a picture. Some paint it as a stable, self-regulating community, while others suggest that its prosperity may have come at the cost of a certain roughness around the edges. It probably depended on who you were. If you were a successful tobacco farmer with strong community ties, life was likely pretty good. If you were an outsider with a grievance, you might find yourself with little recourse. But for nearly 4 centuries, the model worked. The Cospaioli, through a combination of agricultural skill, geographic luck, and a healthy dose of minding their own business, carved out a unique existence. They were a tiny speck of independence in a world of burgeoning states and empires, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most successful way to deal with the powers that be is to politely, quietly, and profitably ignore them. And for that, they deserve a quiet nod of historical admiration, perhaps accompanied by a contemplative puff of imaginary smoke. Okay, all good things, as they say, must eventually come to an end, even for a plucky little republic that survived on a mapmaker's mistake and a popular plant. The world outside Cospaya's sheltered valley is beginning to churn with new ideas, new conflicts, and new political realities. The gentle, smoky haze that has enveloped Cospaya for centuries is about to encounter some rather strong winds of change. You're now moving into the late 18th and the early 19th centuries. The air in Europe is electric, and not just from thunderstorms. The French Revolution has sent shockwaves across the continent, and a certain diminutive Corsican named Napoleon Bonaparte is busy redrawing the map of Europe with the tip of his sword. This general upheaval in Italy during this period, with shifting borders, new republics being declared and then dissolved, and a growing sense of Italian nationalism, though full unification is still a ways off, is our key historical backdrop. The old, comfortable order, which allowed for quaint anomalies like Cospaya, is rapidly disappearing. Efficiency, centralization, and clearly defined borders are the new buzzwords. Tiny, unregulated territories are starting to look less like charming eccentricities and more like administrative headaches, or worse, loopholes to be closed. For Cospaya, this new era spells trouble. Their larger neighbors, the Papal States and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, are themselves being reshaped and reformed by these larger European currents. They are becoming more centralized, more modern by the standards of the day, and less tolerant of little pockets of ungoverned territory on their frontiers. The idea that a few hundred people in a valley could just declare themselves exempt from taxes and laws simply because of a centuries-old surveying error is starting to seem rather anachronistic, outrageous even, to the tidy minds of the new administrators. You mean to tell me there's a village on our border that pays no tax and grows its own tobacco, and we just let them? You can imagine a newly appointed prefect exclaiming, adjusting his spectacles. Adding to Cospaya's woes, their near monopoly on high-quality, readily available, and untaxed tobacco is also eroding. Other regions in Italy and Europe have caught on. Tobacco cultivation is becoming more widespread, and even if it's taxed elsewhere, the sheer volume and variety of competition starts to dilute Cospaya's unique market advantage. The potent Nicotiana rustica of Cospaya, once a prized commodity, now has to compete with other tobaccos, perhaps milder, perhaps more fashionably processed. The golden age of Cospayan tobacco, while not entirely over, is certainly beginning to fade. It's like being the only artisan coffee shop in town for decades, and then suddenly 3 global chains open up on the same street. Your loyal customers might stick around, but the boom times are definitely under pressure. Our quirky detail for this section is the image of the Cospaioli, perhaps their council of elders, attempting to assert their ancient rights in this rapidly changing world. You can almost picture them, earnest and bewildered, presenting a faded, centuries-old document, if such a thing even existed beyond oral tradition, or recounting the story of the 2 Rione streams to a bemused Napoleonic administrator or a stern Tuscan official. But we've always been Cospaya. We don't do taxes. Ask your great-great-great-grandfather's cartographer. The official, of course, would likely just stare blankly, thinking about his new standardized tax codes and territorial integrity. It's a bit like trying to pay for a streaming subscription with a handful of ancient Roman coins. The currency of their independence was losing its value. The neighboring states, particularly Tuscany and the Papal States, begin to cast more covetous glances towards Cospaya. It wasn't about conquering a mighty foe. It was about tidying up the map, absorbing this little anomaly, and not incidentally, gaining control over its lands and the remnants of its once booming tobacco trade. The unregulated nature of Cospaya, once tolerated, now increasingly looked like a haven for smuggling and a loss of potential revenue. Why should these few families benefit when we could be taxing that tobacco, or at least controlling its production, became the prevailing sentiment in the corridors of power in Florence and Rome. The concept of a perpetual free pass wasn't really gelling with the new political ideologies. This brings us to a scholarly debate. Was Cospaya's demise an inevitable consequence of its anachronistic nature in a modernizing Europe, or was it primarily driven by the specific political and economic pressures from its immediate neighbors? Some historians argue that such tiny, informal statelets were doomed to be swallowed up as larger nations consolidated their power and rationalized their borders. Cospaya, in this view, was simply a relic of a bygone era, its time naturally running out. Others contend that had the political will in Tuscany and the Papal States been different, Cospaya might have clung on for a while longer, perhaps evolving into some kind of recognized special administrative zone. But the lure of incorporating the territory, ending the smuggling, and asserting full sovereignty proved too strong for its neighbors. It's the classic unstoppable force meets a very small, very stationary object scenario. And in history, the force usually wins, especially when the object is sitting on potentially taxable land. The Cospaioli must have sensed the change in the wind. The casual tolerance of their neighbors was replaced by a more pointed scrutiny. The merchants visiting their valley might have spoken of new regulations, stricter border controls. The world was closing in on their little haven of liberty and leaf. The quiet, forgotten valley was about to be remembered, and not in a good way for its independence. The party, it seemed, was almost over, and nobody likes it when the lights come on and the music stops, especially when you've been dancing tax-free for nearly 400 years. Okay, the pressure is mounting. The once comfortable ambiguity that shielded Cospaya is now a glaring spotlight. The tiny republic, born of a forgotten line on a map, is about to be officially erased, or rather neatly redrawn into the territories of its more powerful neighbors. The final chapter of Cospaya's nearly 400-year story of accidental independence is being written. You find yourself in the year 1826. The Napoleonic storm has passed, but the changes it brought are permanent. Italy is still a patchwork of states, but the drive for more defined, more controllable territories is stronger than ever. For Cospaya, the end comes not with a bang, not with a defiant last stand, but with a treaty. On June 26, 1826, the remaining territory of Cospaya was formally divided between the Papal States and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. 14 Cospayan representatives signed an act of submission. The little republic was no more. Its land, its people, and its tobacco fields were absorbed, split almost evenly between the two larger states that had flanked it for centuries. The boundary line was finally officially drawn. No more convenient ambiguity of the two Rioni streams. This formal dissolution in 1826 is our historical anchor point for the end of this unique entity. What happened to the Cospaioli, those citizens of a republic that suddenly ceased to exist? Well, they didn't vanish. As part of the agreement, each Cospayan citizen received a rather unique compensation. From the Pope, each one was given a silver coin, a papal scudo, which became known locally as the Pepetto. This wasn't exactly a fortune, but it was a symbolic gesture, an acknowledgement of their previous status, perhaps. Think of it as a severance package, 19th century style, for an entire micronation. Sorry, we're absorbing your ancient, tax-free republic. Here's a shiny coin. More importantly for their livelihood, the Cospaioli were also granted the right to continue cultivating tobacco. This was a significant concession. While they would now be subject to the laws and taxes of Tuscany or the Papal States, depending on which side of the new line their land fell, their expertise as tobacco growers was recognized and to some extent protected. The Nicotiana rustica would still grow in the valley, but its profits would now contribute to the coffers of Florence or Rome. The unique economic conditions that made Cospaia a tobacco boomtown were gone, but the tradition of cultivation was allowed to persist, at least for a time. Our quirky detail here is certainly that silver pepetto. Imagine holding that coin, a tangible symbol of the end of your quirky, independent way of life. Was it a comfort, a small solace, or a bitter reminder of what was lost? Perhaps both. There's also the somewhat poignant image of those 14 Cospaian representatives, likely simple farmers and village elders, not seasoned diplomats, formally signing away their little nation. Was there a ceremony? A final defiant puff of pure Cospaian tobacco before they put pen to paper? Probably not. It was likely a rather subdued, practical affair, but one can imagine the weight of history in that room. They were closing a chapter that had been open since 1441. That's a long run for a republic most of the world never even knew existed. It makes you wonder if they kept a copy of the treaty, maybe framed it next to a particularly good tobacco leaf. The reaction of the Cospaioli themselves is a subject of some scholarly discussion. Was there widespread resistance to the annexation, or a sense of weary acceptance, perhaps even relief for some? The records are sparse on this. Some historians suggest that while there was undoubtedly a sadness at the loss of their unique independence and tax-free status, the Cospaioli were also pragmatic. The world had changed dramatically. Maintaining their anomalous status was becoming increasingly difficult, perhaps even dangerous. The offer of continued tobacco cultivation and the symbolic payment might have seemed like the best deal they could get in a situation where they held very few cards. Others argue that the loss of their distinct identity and autonomy, however informal, would have been keenly felt, a blow to their local pride and their way of life. It's likely a mix, a sigh for what was lost, but also a practical squaring of shoulders to face the new reality. After all, worrying about papal taxes was probably a new and unwelcome pastime. The legacy of Cospaia is fascinating. It's a story of resilience, of accidental liberty, and of how a tiny community carved out a niche for itself against the odds, all thanks to a geographical blip and a popular plant. For centuries, it was a haven of sorts, a place operating under its own unwritten rules, a testament to the human ability to adapt and thrive in unusual circumstances. Even after its dissolution, the memory of the Republic of Cospaia lingered in the local area, a piece of folklore, a story told by grandparents. The name Cospaia still exists today as a frazione, a small village, a quiet reminder of its unique past. The tobacco fields are largely gone, replaced by other crops, but the tale of the smoky little republic that time forgot endures. It's a reminder that sometimes the most interesting histories are found in the smallest of places, in the footnotes and forgotten corners of the grand historical narrative. It kind of makes you want to go examine old maps for other potential micronations, doesn't it? Wait, is that an ink smudge or an unclaimed principality? And so, the story of Cospaya fades into the annals of Italian history, a peculiar and charming episode, from an accidental birth to a smoky golden age, and finally to a quiet absorption. It's a journey that reminds us that borders are fluid, laws are made and unmade, and sometimes the most enduring legacy is a good story, especially one that smells faintly of strong tobacco and independence. Now, as the echoes of Cospaya's tale gently fade, let's begin to settle down. The story of this tiny accidental republic, a whisper in the grand opera of Italian history, is drawing to its close for tonight. Let your mind drift from the sun-drenched hills of Umbria, from the scent of curing tobacco leaves, from the quiet murmur of a village that governed itself for nearly 400 years. Feel the weight of your own body, comfortable and still. The Cospaioli, with their pragmatic independence and their flourishing fields, have played their part on history's stage. Their world, once so vibrant with its unique freedoms and its pungent crop, now softens at the edges like a memory from a long ago dream. The hustle of the traders, the quiet deliberations of the village elders, the rustle of tobacco leaves in the Italian breeze. All these sounds are growing distant, fainter. Imagine the last wisps of smoke from a Cuspayan pipe curling upwards, disappearing into the twilight. There's nothing more to figure out, nothing more to analyze, just the gentle letting go as the story settles and your mind clears. Allow any remaining thoughts about treaties or streams or silver coins to simply float away like leaves on a gentle current. The borders of your awareness can soften now, becoming as pleasantly undefined as Cospaya's once were. There's only stillness here and the quiet invitation to rest. Every breath you take is a soft rhythm, lulling you deeper into tranquility. The journey is complete. The tale is told. Let the peace of this moment envelop you, a comforting blanket. All is well, all is calm.